Hey friends, this week we are talking about how to handle rejection, which is kind of the worst. We've all had it happen. You open up your email, you get an email from somebody you've queried or asked to do an interview or some kind of thing, and you just suddenly feel like the floor is falling out from underneath you and everything sucks. It kind of feels, in a lot of ways, for me at least, worse than getting turned down if I'm asking somebody on a date. Like, it almost is just worse than that. And because I am neurodivergent, that is a thing. If anybody's just joining the channel, hi, I'm autistic and have ADHD, that's a thing. Because of that, I experience something called rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is just like a guttural, awful response to feeling rejected, even when I'm not. Like, even if I'm not actually being rejected by somebody or something, if I feel rejected, I have this horrible nervous system reaction where I just kind of shut down. And it's not a fun experience, as it probably doesn't sound like it's an enjoyable one. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that I really do know what rejection feels like on so many levels, including as an author. And I know I'm an editor and I seem, I've been the person doing the rejecting a lot of the time, so I'm explaining this because I get it in ways a lot of folks don't. And what I want to share with you today is some of the things that I have come to understand about rejection in our sphere as writers and how to deal with those feelings. This also can be used in ways outside of just the writing sphere, but I am kind of targeting this towards writers, though if you see things that you might be able to use outside of writing, please just take them and run. The first thing I want to talk about is how do we understand rejection. We need to look at rejection in terms of why it happened, assuming we actually got rejected. It feels sometimes like it's not logical, like we can't wrap our minds around why not us. And a lot of times rejection letters don't really come with a lot of information. Like it'll say, hey, thanks for your interest, but no thank you. And we don't really get a lot of insight out of that. Sometimes rejection letters come with reasons, and if they do, dig into those. But I can tell you, when I was doing acquisitions for the publishing company I started at, and even for my own, there are a lot of reasons I rejected manuscripts that had absolutely nothing to do with whether or not the manuscript was any good. There were a lot of reasons. It could be everything from somebody not following the query guidelines and giving me the information I needed in order to make the assessment and not have to, like, do a bunch of digging. Those got auto-rejected if I didn't have the information I'd asked for, because I got so many that I didn't take time to dig into every single one of them, and we don't have the time because that's just unfortunately the reality. Or it might be a book that we just couldn't represent effectively. Like, I was mostly a, fantasy, sci-fi, speculative fiction publisher. That was really what I used to do. And if I got somebody querying a memoir, I couldn't help them. It just wasn't a genre I worked in. It had nothing to do with them or their book. It wasn't something I did. And that's a thing that we really need to think about is a lot of the time these rejections, they might just have nothing to do with you. They're not about you or your book. It might just be that that particular person, that podcast, that publisher, that whatever it is, it's just not right for them at that time. It isn't personal. And kind of like with dating, there are a billion reasons why somebody might not be into what you're selling them. It's not usually because you're not good enough. That's not typically the response. Like, just, as with dating, it's not because you're not good enough, because that would be awful. But it's more along the lines of, this is not the right match for me. I mean, you might be a wonderful person. I might like you very much across the table. You might be a great guy, but you're just not the person I want to date. It might just not be, I don't get that feeling, that magic. And that is a true thing for a lot of publishers and agents. If they don't feel that magic, they aren't going to effectively represent your book, and it's not going to be for them. It's not about whether or not you're good. One book, for example, that I rejected personally, it was a story of a woman who was still living in, I think, Afghanistan at the time, under Taliban rule. This was a long time ago, so yes, it was actually while the Taliban was active. It was before bin Laden died. There was a woman who wrote a story about herself and her survival and her family's survival under that horrible circumstance. It was a phenomenally important book. And she sent it to the publishing company I was working for at the time. And we had a lot of really deep discussion about it, but it came down to we're just not the right publisher for this story. We could not have done the work to get her to where she needed to be because I didn't have the media contacts to do that. None of us had the industry experience in that area of things. And the story was important and her writing was really good, but we just could not help her. We were not the people. It wasn't about whether or not her book was good. I just couldn't help her with that thing. And that is a very common thing for people to experience. You know, you might not be approaching the right person for you. That rejection isn't about you. If you do receive feedback, like I said a minute ago, that the book isn't ready yet, or it has issues, or there's reasons why they're saying maybe not this one, think about those reasons and really give them consideration. Because if they're rejecting you with feedback, that means they care enough about what you're doing to give you feedback and like, no, I want to be invested in this. Like, I see something here. I might not be the right person for it, but I see something. Or they might just be like, hey, I want to save you some pain. You really need to go back and re-edit this thing because it's not ready. That isn't a rejection of you, and they're giving you the tools you need to move forward. Which kind of brings us to the next segment here is feeling the feelings. And rejection hurts. It does. It doesn't matter how much we tell ourselves it's not about us, it's gonna sting. It's never gonna feel good. And we kind of have to just accept that that emotion is something we're going to experience. However, there is a point at which that discomfort and that sting can become something far less useful, and that's bitterness. And when you get to that point, it's you start blaming everybody else. You blame the rest of the world. I can't tell you the number of rejections I sent that I got really nasty responses from. Things like, you're just a tool of the publishing elite and you're just a sellout and you don't understand my genius. I got those all the time. I got other things that I'm not going to repeat here. Like, I got people threatening my health and safety because I told them I didn't want to publish their book. That anger and bitterness is usually covering up the pain of rejection because usually those emotions come out of something else. I'm not going to get all psychology here, but anger is a lot of the time seen as a secondary emotion that is in response to something else. So anger is more often than not a response to another emotion. Again, that's psychology. You may or may not agree with me, and not all psychologists agree with each other, but that is something that is commonly discussed. That anger in that way doesn't really help you. It isn't, I'm not going to tell you how you are or aren't allowed to feel. Like, your feelings are your feelings, and they're valid. Like, however you experience your rejection is how you experience your rejection. But if you allow those bitter, angry, sometimes even hateful feelings to creep in, it's going to damage your ability to move forward and handle future rejections, because you're going to get them. We all do. I get rejections. It's just a thing that happens. It's part of our life. It's part of our world. Rejection is an inevitability, whether it's in writing or anything else. And that kind of anger usually leads to lashing out at the source of that rejection, which kind of brings us to our next point. As you can see, I've got a through line that I'm following here. How do you behave following a rejection? When you get told, no, I'm sorry, this ain't for you, how do you handle it? What do you do? The publishing world is surprisingly small. It feels really big, but it's surprisingly tiny. And if you lash out and if you get nasty with people, we're going to tell each other. I can't tell you the number of times that I got one of those really nasty responses to my rejections, and I then went to colleagues and were like, hey, if this person comes to you, don't do it. You're dodging a bullet, because this person is going to be awful to work with. They are going to be horrible. If they try and come, don't give them time of day. And it's not because I was being petty or anything, but if somebody's going to lash out that hard when they're told no, they are not going to handle the editing process well, because the editing process, particularly with traditional publishing, is something you don't get a huge amount of say over and don't get to say no to a lot. And if you're in indie publishing, your editor is still going to be like, hey, here are all the things about your book that don't work, and it's going to hurt, because it feels like rejection sometimes. Even if it's not, it can actually feel that way. If you're an indie, you can be like, I'm not taking any of these suggestions. You can go pound sand, and that is your complete right. Though I will say you've probably paid a lot of money to just throw them away and not use them or think about them. But that is certainly a decision you can make. In traditional publishing, though, once you've signed a contract, that's not a decision you get to make. You can ask to be let out of the contract, and even then they might be like, nope, sorry, you don't get to do that. Thanks, though. We've invested the money. And I'm not saying here to be clear, I want to say also, I'm not saying you shouldn't call out people who are like disproportionately rejecting marginalized voices. Like if you see problems, call them out. But if somebody just sent you a rejection letter and you're out there screaming from the rooftops about how awful they are and how much you hate them, we find out. If you do respond to a rejection at all, if you do, and you probably shouldn't, but if you're going to, be gracious. Say, hey, thanks for your time. I hope you have a great week. Or whatever it is. Just something really polite, short, sweet. That kind of thing can engender goodwill towards you in the industry in the future because they'll be like, oh, okay, this person is behaving well. I mean, maybe if they send me something else in the future, I won't immediately delete it. Because I know that this person is, that might not have been for me, but maybe their next one will. And that's a thing. Like, we remember those names too. Like, if I have some names that stick out into my brain of people that I rejected who were really aggressive with me, and those names are on a list that I'm like, never working with those people. They might not ever want to work with me, and that's fine too. It's not like they're coming back, back down my door, but I have had that happen before where I sent a rejection. Somebody sent me a really nasty message and then sent me their next manuscript expecting me to publish it. Obviously, that went about as well as you think. This also includes not whining in public. So, if you get a rejection, don't mope about it in public spaces. Really don't. It's not good. I'm not saying not to have your feelings. If you want to have a conversation about the rejection and really just need to go rant and yell and scream, choose a friend, talk to that friend, or maybe a small group of people. Say you're in a Discord server with a bunch of other authors and you're all dealing with querying, and if you need to just get some feelings out, they will understand. But make sure that these are private spaces, because having a big dramatic reaction to a rejection, again, there are readers out there and other authors out there who will see that and again will be like, that's a red flag. I am not playing that game. That is not a good game for me to play. And they will back off. And you will get a reputation. And it's not a reputation that will help your career move forward. When you get a rejection, there's no set timeline for bouncing back. There really isn't. There's no universal answer. But I can tell you that you shouldn't just sit around and languish in your feelings for too long. Like, give yourself a couple of days. Excuse me, my allergies are acting up. Give yourself a couple of days. And, take some time. But the longer you let that rejection live in your head, the bigger it's going to be. I used to ride horses. I would love to again, but that is just how things are. But one of the things that happened is when you're riding horses, you are inevitably, at some point during your horseback riding time, going to fall off the horse. You are either going to get thrown or you're going to fall. And one of the things the instructors always said is, the minute you can, get back on the horse. This wasn't because you needed to push through pain or injury. They weren't like, rub some dirt in it, it's fine. No, the point here is, if you get thrown or fall, it's really easy for that to build into fear in your brain. And then it makes the whole process much bigger than it is. If you immediately dust yourself off, grab the horse, have a conversation with them, and get back on the horse, assuming it is safe for you and the horse, obviously, please don't come at me, equestrians. I know there are times when you don't get back on the horse, but we're talking just like, you fell off. You get back up on the horse, and you show to yourself that yes, you can do this. Yes, this is a thing you want to keep doing. And it helps erase some of that immediate fear response and pull some of that reaction out of your brain. It helps diffuse that bomb. Once you're through the initial barrage of emotions and you have the opportunity to vent them and share that with whoever you need to share it with, friends, colleagues, whatever, have a good vent session, go out for drinks. That drink might be coffee. It doesn't need to be alcohol, but whether you're eating cheesecake or having a beer, or whether you're going and playing video games for 12 hours, whatever your vice of choice is. Like, go do your thing to help yourself calm down and chill, but get back on the horse. If your rejection says, hey, this really needs more editing before we can move forward, then start editing. Take that and maybe talk to a beta group or whatever it is you need to workshop your book in order to get to the point where you want to. Or if there's no information on that rejection, well, time to send another query. Time to find somebody else. And if you're getting a ton of rejections and it looks like it might be a quality issue, you can always hire a professional. I do that kind of work all the time. I'm working with a client right now who's looking for a Big Five contract and wanted an edit before pitching to the Big Five because they know in order to get into the place they want to get, they need to have a really clean manuscript. So they hired me to work on it. That might be a thing you do. If you can't afford to do that, well, there's a bunch of self-editing tools out there, and there's a bunch of methods. My book, How to Write the Damn Book, talks about self-editing pretty deeply, and that will give you some places to start, even if you don't have the money to hire a professional. That is absolutely an option. Self-editing can get you a long ways if you know what you're doing. It won't get you over the finish line for publishing a book yourself, probably, but if you're querying, you can get a long ways. You don't need to sit in the emotional soup forever. You just don't. And if you wait forever, you're never going to keep moving forward. You're never going to get past where you're at. And then you won't have a career. You won't have a future. So regardless of what forward looks like for you after that rejection, start moving that way. That is, unfortunately, a thing. As I kind of mentioned earlier, rejection gives us insight. Sometimes it teaches us that we're not meant to be in a place. It's not necessarily a bad place or a negative one, but it might not be a place that we're supposed to be in. There have been occasions where I was rejected, and it was actually a good thing. Before coming out as transmasculine, I was scheduled to speak at the Women in Publishing conference. I'd been accepted as a speaker. It was a done deal. And before that happened, that's coming up in, actually, I think it's coming up next month. It's going to be awesome. They're going to be great. But before that happened, I came out as transmasculine, and I spoke to the person who was running the conference. Her name's Alexa. She's lovely. And I sent her an email hey, so here's the thing that just happened. And she spent a long time thinking about it before getting back, and she declined to have me as a speaker at the conference because I don't identify with woman. She's incredibly pro-trans, she's incredibly pro-non-binary, but I don't identify with woman, and all of their speakers at this conference have to identify with woman. That's just part of their thing. And she turned me down in the kindest manner possible, but also opened a door to another thing, and I'm going to be speaking to her community in, I think in April, I believe, and we're going to be doing a talk because she really thought that what I had to say was valuable, and she wanted her people to hear it, but that just wasn't the right venue for me. And that actually felt really good. It was okay, yeah, I'm a man, so of course I'm not speaking at the Women in Publishing conference. Obviously. That makes perfect sense. And it was really affirming to my identity. It's possible that sometimes we pitch our books to places that we're well, maybe whatever. And we get rejected and we're maybe this book doesn't actually belong there. Maybe this place isn't really the spot that my audience is, or maybe this publisher just isn't right for me. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It can actually just help you winnow down where you are supposed to be by being told, well, you probably shouldn't hang out there. That spot's not for you. So you'll find out the place that is for you because you were told that that spot probably wasn't. Whether it's traditional publishing, whether it's indie publishing, you're going to find places that aren't for you. And getting told that those places aren't for you and discovering that those places aren't for you, it's not a referendum. It's not a negative thing. It's just, that's not where we're at. So we can learn something from that. The final point I really want to address here is that rejection isn't failure. I'm going to say that again. Rejection isn't failure. It oftentimes feels like it, and I know that. It really feels like that hard sometimes. But it isn't failure in the broad sense. Yes, technically it could be considered a failure, but what is it a failure of? It's, in this case, more like you're trying to put a puzzle piece in a puzzle and you found a place that that puzzle piece doesn't actually go. And it doesn't matter how much you try and push that puzzle piece into the spot, it's not going to fit there. So it's not failure necessarily, it's just a spot that doesn't fit that piece. Or sometimes that piece that you're holding goes to a puzzle that's entirely different than the one you're trying to put together. The picture's entirely different. And you didn't realize that until you looked at the puzzle piece and you looked at the other puzzle and you're like, wow, those color schemes are not the same at all. This is, in fact, not part of that puzzle. I'm going to go find the puzzle that this piece goes to. And that's kind of the thing. Regardless of what you're turned down for, you might be sticking yourself into a place that you don't fit. And you need to find the place that is for you. Rejection is not the end of the road. It is, in fact, possibly the start of something else. It's not the end of something. It's a signal that you need to take another route, another direction, another means of getting to where you're going. The destination might not even change. It might be the destination is exactly the same as it was. But you just need to take another road to get there because this one is under construction and you are not going to be able to drive on it. You can try, but it ain't going to go well for you. That road might be full of potholes. Like, the reality is, like, come on. We are going to be facing a lot of rejections in life, in writing. We have goals we want to achieve, and we are going to hit points where those goals just don't happen in the way we thought they were going to happen, or the way we might have wanted them to happen. And sometimes when we hit those potholes, we need to stop and take our car in for repairs because it threw off our alignment. Other times it's just like, well, that was rough. I should have avoided that. But you hit too many and it'll destroy your car. These aren't journey-ending sinkholes, though. It's not like this is the only road forward and it's washed out. There are other paths. These are just bumps in your road. So take a deep breath, we reassess, and we figure out what we need to do in order to move forward. That's it. Rejection isn't failure. It's just a sign that this method, this means, this moment, this publisher, this agent, this deal, it might not be for you. That doesn't mean it's failure. It just means you need to find another road. I hope that this helps. I have faith in you in whatever you're trying to accomplish. I understand that it is scary out there right now, and there's a lot going on, but I have faith in you. I have faith in your book. I have faith in your writing. I have faith in you as a person. Regardless of whatever rejection brought you to this video, I have faith that you will find a way around that. It might look different than you thought, but you'll get there. Just keep going, and don't give up. I hope you have a great week. I will talk to you next week. Take care.